Every company starts with a problem. You have to have a problem that you are trying to solve. And then you have to figure out if you can solve that problem and if there are people out there that have that problem and are looking for a solution. That's 100% of every company. There is no other kind of, way of going about this. And so what I'm seeing a lot of is organizations that start with, well, I want to build something with AI. And then they start to build something, they come up with some cool idea for AI. And then they start to figure out now, okay, who am I going to sell this to? Who are my customers? That is backwards. If you go through the motions and you come up with the problem, figure out who your customers are and how you're going to solve their problems with your solution, then you can figure out, okay, now that I've got that, what technology can I use to build that? And I can almost guarantee you right now that most of them don't require AI to accomplish.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to From Crisis to Justice. I am your host, Parag Amin, and I am joined by a very special guest today, Chris Hood. Chris is a leading expert in digital strategy, customer experience, and AI innovation with over 35 years of experience driving transformation in business and technology. As a former Google executive, Chris led digital transformation initiatives for Fortune 500 companies, focusing on enhancing customer success and engagement. He's worked with global brands like Disney, Universal, Fox, Domino's, and Intel, and he's pioneered new storytelling technologies and digital solutions. He's also the author of Customer Transformation and Infallible, two books that provide deep insights into aligning business strategy with evolving customer expectations in the digital era. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this.
Me too. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with the storytelling and how storytelling has maybe transformed over the years? So like, what parts do you think have stayed very similar, and what parts do you think have changed over the years?
Yeah, I think what has stayed the same is basically our desires to hear new and interesting stories, as well as the general storytelling process. Really hasn't changed in thousands of years. But the mechanisms and channels by which we consume those stories have definitely changed. And I think technology obviously is a huge part of it. I think some other areas, such as even like COVID, has changed how we engage more openly in public settings. We've seen the decline of movie theaters over the course of the last 5 years, with most movie theaters starting to go out of businesses. The technology is up to a satisfaction level that we can do the exact same experience in the comfort of our own home. Obviously, then when we start to look at other types of channels and mechanisms by which we engage, we've got our phones and our devices that are constantly in our hands that we can go and look at content and get clips of stories shared with us on a minute by minute basis. I also think because of that, the way we think about stories has changed. For example, instead of, say, a 2-hour sit down and watch a movie, we want that movie experience in 2 minutes. And I think our attention span and our desire for a lot of different types of content has also really changed how we are listening to stories. And then on top of all of that, we have also a drastic increase of opportunity to share our opinions. And whether those opinions are good or bad, we will flock to social media, share those. Our belief in what is real versus fake, our geo and political belief systems in terms of I agree with it or I don't agree with that. All of that is really changing how we think about storytelling broadly and how we consume data on our daily basis.
Yeah. And so what are your thoughts on the components of great storytelling?
Beginning, middle, and end. What's hard right now, and I think we're, we're experiencing this, is that there's a very limited subset of stories to begin with, and so a lot of what we see now has been retold. If we look over the course of the last 50 years, it used to cost a lot of money to produce a story or a movie or a TV show. It still does today, but the difference is somebody with a mobile phone can go out and film a movie of their choosing. And so we're getting a lot more content, a lot cheaper content. And so the retelling of these stories is creating, it's like the superhero movies. Every year there's, a slew of superhero movies, and people will still go and see them. But can we argue they are good? Do we argue that they're bad, or do we argue that they're repetitive? Jurassic Park is getting ready to come out with the ninth version of a Jurassic Park movie. And I was listening to somebody on the radio, and they're like, okay, let me get it straight. There's an island, there's dinosaurs, and then everybody gets killed. Okay, I got the movie, right? And so I think trying to break free of that stereotype, those tropes, those stories, to create original and interesting, compelling stories is very challenging today. But that's part of what makes storytelling and movie experiences interesting, is when we can actually go and capture something unique and different that entertains us.
Right. Yeah. And, I'm an avid proponent that storytelling it's one of the oldest things and methods of passing on information, even from our ancestors. And so I think there's something innate and hardwired in us that connects with stories. I think that's also why we resonate with certain movies or even certain characters in movies or even advertising. If you look at some of the best advertising, it tells a story, even if it's only in 30 seconds or a minute. It makes you feel certain kinds of emotions, and it makes you feel a certain kind of connection with characters you've never met before. And so the ability to convey that emotion through the screen is so incredibly important. And the nice thing is, with increasing technology, we see increasing abilities or methods to be able to tell stories in different creative ways. I mean, even Pixar, for example, you take cartoon type characters, fake characters, and somehow when we watch a Pixar movie, at least many of them, you feel some kind of emotional draw to this completely made up fictional character. It doesn't look human at all, but somehow has these human characteristics. How do you think AI is going to change that, if at all? Do you think it's going to help it? Do you think it's going to hurt it?
Well, you're also touching on something that is interesting in terms of how entertainment storytelling has shifted. Storytelling has always been a community event. You would sit around a campfire and tell a story, right? You would go to a movie theater and engage in that storytelling with other people around you. And now we have our devices and our phones. And even though you might have multiple and millions of people watching the same content, you're doing it in a singular, personal way of viewing. And so when we start thinking about AI and its impact on that type of experience, we're further pushing a singular individual type of experience, as opposed to that community style of sharing together in whatever the story is. Um, and what AI is doing really more broadly is it's reducing the need to experience things with other people. For example, even communication or collaboration, teamwork, the human emotions that we generally would get from listening or watching something, when that is one sided, it becomes a completely different experience. A good example of this is if you've ever talked with, say, your home device, Alexa or Google Home, and you've asked it, like, tell me what the weather is. One way to kind of judge this community type of experience is, do you respond back to your home assistant and say, well, thank you, right? Like, are you having that two-way collaboration or communication in the process? And when that starts to get removed from the equation, then we are further removing those human elements, whether they're emotional elements or the uniquely human capacity for entertainment, humor, irony, you know, all of those things that we can understand because we're humans. We start to lose that because of the AI.
Yeah, and so, when it relates to AI and storytelling in the business world, what do you think that business owners should be doing maybe to incorporate storytelling or AI into their respective businesses?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling in terms of just business practices broadly, you all should be doing. I mean, storytelling is not just once upon a time, it's in your branding and your messaging and how you want to come across to potential clients and consumers. It's about the experience, it's about the breadth of what you want to present out there to the world about who you are and what you're trying to accomplish or share with those individuals who become your customers. That's natural. It's going to happen. I mean, there's very few companies probably out there that just pop up a brand, don't really think about the message, right, and the messaging, and then just start selling something. There's always some other thing behind it. Most specifically, is you are trying to solve a problem, and so you have to communicate what is the problem and how are you solving that. And that all comes from you said it earlier: advertising, marketing, and storytelling. From an AI perspective, I think what people have to start to think about is what is the actual benefits of AI when it comes to that experience you are trying to present to your customers. And in a lot of cases, it is very sterile, it is very dry, it is not emotional. And so I think businesses have to do a little better job right now in terms of learning what the capabilities of AI actually are so that they can then figure out how are they going to leverage this technology along with those human emotional components so that you can enhance that experience further.
Yeah, and so when it comes to elevating or connecting with certain types of just the human experience or human emotion in general, how does a business owner go about deciding which emotions or which emotions to evoke and therefore which stories to tell?
Yeah, it's going to be based on your product. You know, a sports product like Nike obviously has a completely different tone and context of what they're trying to promote versus somebody like, say a Taco Bell, right? Where even Taco Bell, like, look, you want to be a part of the in crowd, and the only way you can be a part of that in crowd is by eating more tacos, right? So there is some interesting things like you can compare brands like Apple versus Samsung, or Ferrari versus Ford, right? Those are all part of that equation, and depending upon what your product or the experience, that emotional connection that you want to generate, you're going to have to figure out how do you present that in compelling ways. AI can help you try to figure that out. Like, you could go into ChatGPT and you can say, we want to have a high energy brand message that is, geared towards people who like to run and listen to music at the same time, whatever the case might be. And ChatGPT will probably output some ideas. Here are some marketing options for you. Here's kind of a storyline that you can present. Imagine yourself running early in the morning and listening to your favorite tunes. Like, all of that can help be supported through the use of AI to help you further generate ideas. But you're still going to need to kind of go through it and fine tune it and make sure that that's on your brand, it's on point, it makes sense to you, it resonates with your customers. And for a lot of those types of elements, the AI is not going to be able to support it.
Right. And there's elements of marketing or storytelling that really are shocking or surprising. Meaning, like, I'd read this study about Google, and so even the shade of blue that Google uses in its advertising, it went with a slightly darker shade of blue, and somehow that increased sales by over $200 million annually. And so it's just shocking in multiple levels, right? Because on the one hand, one might not even think to change the color, but then two, to think that that color, the shade of blue, could have that much of a difference when we're not selling. If we're selling the color blue and we want the right shade of blue, sure, that seems like it would make sense. But if we're just selling a generic product or service or whatever, the idea that the shade of blue would make a difference, that seems like you could almost second guess or change any and everything, and it would lead to endless experiments. So what do you
It
think about
poss
that?
Yeah, possible, but as you're talking, I'm noticing the color of the wall behind you. It's not quite blue, it's more of a teal, but the first brand that comes to mind when I look at that, it's Tiffany's, right? And so if you can build that connection, the correlation between a color and instantly say who is, that brand, then you're onto something. If I was to say red and yellow, what brands come to mind? I'm pretty sure instantly most people are thinking McDonald's, right?
Right.
If I then said, something like red and white, you know, you're probably thinking Target. So these companies have really invested into understanding the emotional and mental connections between colors and brand identity and that storytelling. And so, yeah, it seems like it's something that, hey, I can just pick a color and we'd be good, but there could be a lot a lot more to it than just a color palette.
Hmm. Right. And so, in terms of your experience, it transcends multiple industries, from entertainment to gaming to big tech and now digital strategy. What's been your biggest lesson about business across these various industries?
It's what I talk about often. It's that at the end of the day, you have to appease a customer, a person. You have to solve their problems. We've talked before in terms of business more broadly. The customer is always right. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have mixed feelings about that particular statement. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a customer, you do not have a business. So on some level, you have to ensure that you are meeting the needs and expectations of your customers in order to grow your business. And those businesses that can go beyond that, right? We say needs and expectations. Well, that gives us a certain connotation. But if I also said, can you meet the aspirations of your customers? Well, now we're getting into a whole nother area. And so this constant understanding of who your customer is and what they would like to receive from you and how you will deliver that to them more broadly. When we say the customer is always right, your customers who are coming to you as a complete entity is always right. And if you ignore that, then most likely you're going to lose a lot of business and potentially even go out of business.
Right. Yeah. And so, I have the saying that, I don't know that I agree that the customer is always right singularly, but I will say that customers on average are right, because everybody's got the one off or the two off customers who want something that's
Yeah.
completely unusual or crazy. And but if you've got a consensus that this is what clients are saying, or either complimenting or complaining about, it's time it one should listen and make those adjustments.
Yeah, and that percentage is a good way to look at it. Like, let's say 20% of your customers come to you and say, they want some change. Well, that means 80% don't, right? And so if you go down the process of, well, we're going to deliver to this 20%, you risk alienating, if not the entire other 80%. What if you then alienate 20%, right? And you lose that 20%. But what is that, number? If is it 40%, and then you start to really consider a change? Is it 50%, and you say, well, this is a coin flip, and I still risk, alienating the other half. But if you're sitting at, like 80% or 90% of the people are saying, you should consider this change, then it probably is worth considering.
Right. And so, what are your thoughts on businesses trying to stay ahead on digital trends while continuing to innovate, but avoiding alienating their core customers or clients?
Yeah, well, we're seeing that right now with artificial intelligence. And we'll go back to Taco Bell as a great example of this. Right now, if you go into a Taco Bell, you are pretty much presented with a kiosk to do your ordering. They have removed all kind of walk up to the counter and talk to a person and make your order. So you've got a kiosk for ordering. And if you go through the drive through, they've got a virtual assistant that is taking your orders now, as opposed to somebody on the intercom. Now, in all of these different cases, you could argue, well, look, it's sort of like self checkout. I get to go up, I get to make my order. I don't have to worry about trying to confuse them with something customizable. I get to order it exactly how I want to do it in my own time, my own way. In the drive through, they're going to be more accurate because as I'm going through that, it's a virtual assistant. Voice recognition can understand what I'm asking for. They can do upsells without having to worry about somebody saying, well, I don't really like doing upsells, right? So you could look at it from that perspective. But on the flip side of this is you're not giving me a choice. Like, I don't want to talk to a virtual assistant. I don't want to go up to a kiosk and have to place my order. I want to talk to somebody in this process. And so by forcing AI onto their consumers, which by the way, will add that in doing so, they're reducing the amount of staff that they have to hire or have working at any one location at any one time, while also increasing the prices of their products and their menu items. So, what am I getting out of this? I'm not talking to anybody. I'm paying more for that experience, and the food isn't necessarily improving either. So, I feel as if, in general, when you as a consumer are being forced into a scenario where you will have to use AI, we go back to self checkout. Like in most locations, I have a choice: self checkout, or I could go to a lane and and have somebody help me. Um, but if that's not the case, then the ultimate option for me is to go to your competitor, is to go get tacos somewhere else where I can actually talk to somebody, socialize, pay less, and not be forced in using a technology that I don't want to use. And all companies should be thinking about this. How do we provide that choice? And how do we prevent that imposing technology in places where we know the consumers don't want it?
Right. And it's interesting because I think there's something about human nature that craves choice, regardless of what the choice might be. An interesting little anecdote is lobster. Today we know it is something that's supposed to be delectable and tends to be a little bit pricier on the menu. But I don't know if you knew this, Chris, but previously in places like Massachusetts, Maine, they would feed the prisoners lobster every day, and because it was an abundant resource for them, and it was cheap for them to be able to provide it to prisoners, and so they petitioned to say, "Look, it's cruel and unusual punishment to make us eat lobsters every day, and we'd like some sort of choice." And so, what are your thoughts on that in terms of like how important is it that customers, clients, people get a choice, and why do you think that's so important to us?
Well, we'll bring it back to your specialty. If you if you had the choice of a judge, would you take it?
Sure,
if
of
if
course.
if I am looking for an attorney, w- what is it beneficial to me to choose which attorney I would pick, right? If you specialize in one area of the law, why would you force somebody, like you're a divorce attorney and I'm being charged with murder, but I have to use the divorce attorney, for my case. Like, of course we want choice. Obviously, those are extreme situations, but I would even argue, there's some really interesting kind of complex philosophical questions to ask. I've done it in sort of healthcare, like, say you're getting ready to have brain surgery, and you had the choice. A neurosurgeon who has done this procedure thousands of times, but maybe has a 95% success rate, or we've got this new AI that can do it 99% success rate, but has only done it a couple of times. Like, yeah, I want that choice. And when I ask this question, most people will say, well, I want the human to do the surgery. I don't want the AI to do the surgery. We could apply the same practice in law. If you've been, charged with murder, and you're about to, be in front of a judge, do you want a real person who's the judge, or do you want an AI who's sitting up there judging the case? Again, I think most people would pick the real person, because even based on time of day, hey, they're having a good day today, they're letting a lot of things off, right? Like, that's great. Where the AI is going to sit there and say, look, I'm being logical, completely 50-50, no bias, no partial opinions here. It's simply, I'm going to give you my decision. Now, some of us might argue that that's probably a good thing in the court systems right now. But these choices and the impacts of how AI is being replaced and preventing people from having the choice is the area of concern that we should be focused on. Because without that choice, without that inherent desire as humans to be able to pick our favorite flavor of ice cream versus, who to represent us in court, if that all goes away, because we're just going to allow AI to make the choice for us, then we lose a substantial part of what makes us human.
I agree with that. And it's interesting, Chris, because on some of these choices, I completely agree with you. For example, which lawyer you want to hire. And if we've got a choice on a judge, of course, let's go with the judge who's ruled more favorably in our type of case than the one who hasn't. Or a doctor, let's go with the one who we think is going to do the best job. But I will say, if let's say I'm going in for a surgery and the doctor says, look, you've got the choice of scalpel. Should I use this one or this one? That question is going to make me a little nervous,
That's a great point.
So, there are limits. And I think part of it is it's on some of the soft factors, we feel a little bit more comfortable, meaning like if it's like an AI choice versus a human, I'd like to maybe be able to make that choice. Or, for example, if I can get a live operator when I make a phone call versus some kind of call tree or press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and 0 is not an option, and it just resets the whole thing for you. On some of those, I think it's better. But on some of the more technical, harder issues, I think it's just easier and it feels better to be able to trust an expert to say, look, there isn't a choice on this one. This is the right decision. This is what we're going with. And many times it's not even asked. You just assume that it's being handled. Do you have any thoughts on that distinction and maybe why it is that we feel that way?
Well, we again, as humans, we want to place our trust and our faith in the experts. If I was to hire you, I'm not going to sit there and say, although I'm sure you've experienced this before, well, I read on the internet that if we plead this way, we'll have a better chance of winning. No, you are the expert. I'm hiring you to represent me. So I'm going to trust you to make the right decisions. The problem that we are starting to have, and I kind of joke about, I can log on to Google and learn to be a lawyer. The amount of information that is available to us is astronomical. And now even more so, if I go into ChatGPT and I say, pretend you're a lawyer and here's the situation, and here's the contract, and I want to get out of it. How would you argue this? And now I'm like, well, I don't need a law degree. I can do this on my own, right? So we do want to put our trust and faith into the experts, into the people, and that they are ultimately making the correct decision on our behalf, which gets into the ethical and the moral dilemmas of what it takes to be human. But that's a critical component that we always have to consider. I had a really interesting exchange on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, where somebody was talking about leveraging AI for I can't remember exactly what it was, but my response was, yeah, but AI could be wrong. Right now, AI is not 100% correct, and so we have to recognize that. And his response was, well, imagine a world where we don't have to worry about that because AI is 100%. And my response was pretty simple. I said, well, yeah, but then where's the human, right? Like there is some interesting correlation with saying, even though AI is not 100% factually right, neither are we. And so to be able to make that correlation and recognize when AI could be used in appropriate situations for recommendations, you still have to come back with that and say, you know, am I okay with this? Do I accept this? Is this something that I'm comfortable with? And if the answer is yes, then great, keep doing it.
Right. And speaking of AI and business, what are some thoughts on how people can leverage AI for their businesses better? For example, even, ChatGPT, or whatever other AI tools you might recommend or suggest. What are some better ways we could all be leveraging them for our businesses?
Yeah. So there's two core pieces to this. The first one is that you have to understand what AI is capable of doing and what it's not capable of doing. And I think a lot of what we are seeing out there right now is an overly hyped technology that is, claim it's like it can do everything for you. It can revolutionize your life, and understanding those capabilities is a big part of it. That way, when you are reading, like sales pitches or stuff that is out there on the internet, and you're trying to make decisions about how to use AI, you don't get caught up in the marketing pitch and hype versus the reality. Because I've heard of a lot of businesses who say, oh, this is going to completely change how we do business. And then they go invest in it. They bring it in, they try to implement it. And then they realize, well, wait a second, this doesn't do anything that we thought it was going to do. And in most cases, it doesn't. You're spending off of that hype. So educate yourself, be aware of what the capabilities are. That's the first step. The second step is, if you just accept it as kind of a collaboration tool, as a way of increasing processes, of streamlining things, awareness, supporting of like your branding and storytelling, providing you with options. Think of it like a menu. You go into a restaurant, here's a bunch of menu items, you pick which item you want, you order it, you eat it. AI is very similar. Like provide me with a whole bunch of options for improving my brand. Great. Here's a bunch of options. Go through, pick the one that makes sense. But again, this goes into what it is capable of versus what it's not capable of. Understand, like purely from a business strategy or a marketing strategy, if I went into ChatGPT and asked it to provide me with a marketing strategy, every single thing that it's going to list out as an option for you, somebody else has already done, right? It's not going to create some magical new thing that innovates on an idea that has never been heard of before. It can't do that because the root of its learning is existing materials. And so this gives you an example of why you need to learn what the real capabilities are and then figure out how you want to apply those to your business.
Right. Yes. And that's a very interesting point, because that generally is how we use it in my law firm. We don't outsource the thinking, but we will use it for iterative thinking or
Yeah.
thinking deeper. And it's interesting because one of the issues I personally had with just school in general, despite all the time I've spent in school, and therefore maybe that makes me a better, more able critic in that regard, is just the extra amount of time I've spent there. But a big thing is a lot of classes were about memorizing things, and so at the end of it, you've got this memory test. But real life isn't really like that. I mean, certainly you've got some basic things you got to remember and memorize, but the reality of it is the human brain is much better at thinking through issues, but it can only hold so many pieces of information at one time to be able to think through. So I think a lot of times it's much easier to think on paper than it is just mentally, because you can physically put more things down or think through more things on a piece of paper than you can naturally, I think, hold in memory. And I think maybe that's one of the issues with the way some people use AI, is that instead of like the more collaborative approach is the better approach of, hey, help me think through this, can you research this issue, can you tell me about this, and you ask it better questions to be able to get better answers. But that's really the key, I think, is just the asking of better questions. Do you think that's right, and can you elaborate on that a little bit, like if you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, 100% absolutely true. And again, I think there's multiple ways to kind of think about this. In terms of being able to ask the right question and kind of iterate on ideas, it's a great tool, right? Because you don't know everything, and it could present a brainstorm that really kickstarts the right direction for you, right? So even if you don't use it as an answer, you just use it as a catalyst for what's next. That's exactly the purpose of ChatGPT, in all honesty. Now, the flip side of this, and what you're also touching on, is that through the use of something like a ChatGPT, and definitely when we start to think about in the educational environment or the capacity, because people don't really understand how to benefit from AI or generative AI or large language models, they're asking it questions, they're getting responses back, they're cutting and pasting those responses into documents, and what we are really jeopardizing is our overall critical thinking skills. And so I've seen firsthand, even in the college courses that I teach, where critical thinking is going down because as you start to use AI, you have a natural belief that it's correct, right? But we know that even if you did a Google search, you could find a website and the information on the website is incorrect. We have some innate, this is why I called my book Infallible, because we have this belief system in artificial intelligence that it is infallible and that whatever I get out of it must be correct because why, it's smart, it's AI. And that's not the case. And so we are losing the basic critical thinking process of that iteration, of being able to ask smarter questions or being able to collaborate with the AI in real time to say, I like what you said here, but I still have some questions. Or how about if we change that to, look at it this way? That skill set of critical thinking, asking the right questions, we are quickly losing because of AI. And there was a report, I haven't read it yet, but it just came out like this week or last week, which basically shows that critical thinking skills are going down due to generative AI. Our ability to create, to tell stories, to think more logically, all of that is deteriorating primarily because we're trusting AI to have that infallible output.
Yeah, that's right. And it's ironic because in that sense, we're expecting AI to be more human and have those critical thinking and judgment skills, which it does not have. And ironically, humans, therefore, by using AI in that manner, kind of outsource their humanity and become more robotic of you give me this and I'll take it and I'll just put it here. Well, robots can do that. There's really no sense of a human being involved in that aspect of things. But I completely agree with you that I think that the people and the businesses that continue to innovate over the years and will succeed with AI are the ones who understand where it fits into that puzzle and really understand that it's the ability to gather the information, look at it, uh, using their critical thinking skills, but then just be able to iterate faster with it. But then you've still got to be able to think about how you best apply it and experiment with it and look at the various pieces to see how they fit together.
Yeah, you look, you can ask it a question and get a response, but it still requires the thinking beyond that output, right? We go back to how we started, storytelling. Like I can ask Chat GPT to write me a story, and it's going to write you some random story, and it's probably pretty decent. It's probably a story that's been retold, but when we start to dive into it, like that character, I would really like that character to have the persona of the color blue, whatever. And I need that the character to talk as if it's mopey, and we go back to Disney, like the robot recent robot movie, as well as like the Inside Out too, with the emotions, like that type of depth and understanding of the emotional context. ChatGPT can replicate it, but you have to know to ask it to do that replication and how to kind of simulate that response, because it's not going to be able to do it on its own.
Right. Yeah. And so, as it relates to kind of entrepreneurial leadership and whether it's through AI or other tools, do you have any thoughts on how an entrepreneur stays ahead of the curve or ahead of the pack? Any kind of best tips or tricks, especially over the various industries you've been a thought leader in and worked
Yeah,
across?
I mean, I will still go back to ask your customers. you know your customers are your lifeblood. They're going to be the ones. And so now, let's say you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to figure out what new business that you want to create, and even, hey, I want to create an AI business. Well, just so that you're aware, there's about 5,000 new AI companies being built every month. It's really unsustainable at this point. I don't know where we're going to head later in this year, but we're close to, say, a dot-com bubble burst of 2000, right? Like AI, just the amount of investment and the amount of new companies that are in this space, I don't think we can sustain it. But kind of walking through this, every company starts with a problem. You have to have a problem that you are trying to solve. And then you have to figure out if you can solve that problem, and if there are people out there that have that problem and are looking for a solution. That's 100% of every company. There is no other kind of way of going about this. And so what I'm seeing a lot of is organizations that start with, well, I want to build something with AI. And then they start to build something, they come up with some cool idea for AI, and then they start to figure out, now, okay, who am I going to sell this to? Who are my customers? That is backwards.
Sounds like a
And
hobby.
yeah, and so if you go through the motions and you come up with the problem, you figure out who your customers are and how you're going to solve their problems with your solution, then you can figure out, okay, now that I've got that, what technology can I use to build that? And I can almost guarantee you right now that most of them don't require AI to accomplish. If you are leading with AI, if you are saying, I must build an AI company, then you are building a company for the wrong reasons. If you start with, I have a problem and I have some customers and I'm going to solve this problem, and here's my solution, it may have AI in it, And maybe after the fact, you can start to figure out how you can leverage AI to be incorporated into that solution. But there are so many technologies out there that, we talk about like contact. There's so many companies out there that have claimed they have perfected the ability for automation of lead generation. Uh, I, I, I've got a, I've got a, Google Forms document with some, scripting on it, and that does exactly the same thing as your AI tool does for free, right? Like you can't possibly argue with me that your AI tool is going to be more perfect than existing Mailchimp, which can do it without AI. And so this goes back to this concept of understand what it can do, but start with your customer, figure out what the problem is, solve it, then figure out what the technology is. And in that same process, as you're iterating and growing and scaling and expanding and moving towards the next thing, start asking your customers, how would you like to engage with us? What ways, what technologies are you using? What are some of the cool technologies that you really like right now? What are some of the technologies that you don't like right now? There was a research paper that was done towards the end of last year that basically said they presented consumers with a list of different products, and some products were, like a vacuum cleaner, and then they also presented the same product like vacuum cleaner powered by AI. In pretty much every single scenario where they presented the same product as powered by AI, the consumers were turned off and chose the product that did not have AI in it. And so think about that. Like if you ask and talk with your consumers about what they want, you will have a clearer path in terms of what technologies to start thinking about and investing in as you move forward.
Yeah, I love that. And that is very insightful, Chris, because I think a lot of times people don't really focus on the problem and the solution, or what problem it is they're trying to solve, and instead they start thinking about strategies to try to solve an undefined problem and run in circles. They think, okay, well, AI is in right now. I want to use that. A year or two ago, it was the blockchain. And so anything with blockchain, any and everything seemingly had blockchain involved in it, from tokens to like loaves of bread. It's just ridiculous.
The
So
metaverse.
yeah, right. Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't know what exactly happened with that, but we're not hearing about that too much these days. But yes, it's just the word of the day or the word of the month, maybe the word of the year, and then it goes on to something else. And that is interesting that consumers have kind of gotten savvy of that fact. I don't know that investors necessarily have, because seemingly there seems to be a multiple applied to whatever's hot in the moment, whether it's blockchain or AI now. I think that they're adding multiples in terms of the valuation of a company for that very reason.
Yeah, I had somebody also on LinkedIn, claim, some revolutionary thing of the future with AI. And I said, well, none of that is reality. Like that's not going to happen. And his response was a question back to me that said, so are you saying that all of the investors, all of the big tech firms, all of the big corporations, they're all wrong? And I said, it's not that they're wrong, but ask yourself the question, why do you think the investors are promoting it? And if you can answer that question, you better understand the situation we're in. Well, why is it 3x, 10x, 4x, and why are they out there claiming everything? They're invested in this. They want it to sell, because if it sells, they make money. You touched on solving problems that don't exist. There's a Salesforce commercial out there. I'm sure you've seen it, with Matthew McConaughey sitting in the rain at a restaurant, and then Woody Harrelson is over, across the street in a dry restaurant. And the whole conversation is about, if I had an AI agent, I would have not been stuck out in the rain. Well, what is the problem here? Like, well, you're trying to, paint the picture of a problem that needs an AI agent for something that would never actually happen. Are you saying that we are too stupid as a society to recognize that it's raining, or that the restaurant would still seat us outside at a table when it is pouring down rain? Like, these things don't exist. Now, we could argue, well, look, they're just trying to make fun of it because it's a commercial, but they are driving a narrative of that you cannot possibly survive in this world without our AI tool. And when you kind of sort through all of that hype and the marketing slogans and agendas, and realize that the emphasis on is for them to make more money, then you start to realize that we are trying to force AI down people's throats for problems that simply don't even exist.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. It's like, what's the answer to 99 out of 100 questions? It's usually money. So,
Yeah.
um, Chris, what if you could offer one piece of advice to the listeners out there that you think would really benefit them? What would it be and why?
I mean, I guess it depends on what they
If
want
you
to
picked
hear.
anything.
Yeah.
No, it's about what you want to
Yeah.
say.
I mean, right now we've touched on several of these. Like the first one is just as regards to AI, go and do a little research. Educate yourself on what is AI and what is not. I'll give you another really quick example of this. Um, Autonomous vehicles, autonomous drones. The word autonomous, everybody out there is going to be selling you some sort of, hey, we've got this autonomous process that's going to revolutionize everything for you. uh, as of today, there is no such thing as autonomous. It doesn't exist. It's a theoretical achievement that we have not reached yet. Autonomous vehicles is a marketing term. No vehicle is actually autonomous. The best way to explain this is, if you're driving in your car, and you're about to run out of gas, or say your battery is draining, there's no car on the planet that decides to self-preserve itself and automatically change course and go to the local gas station and connect to the pump and fills it up and pays for it. Like, cars can't do that, right? They might ask you, like, hey, I noticed that the battery's running low, would you like to change course and go to the gas station or charging station? In which case, user input says yes, and then you change course. Autonomy says that the car could make that decision itself. There is nothing on this planet that is autonomous. And yet, watch closely as you look across the internet how many people are claiming they've solved autonomy in some form or another with their AI products. The more you can understand this, and the more you can recognize those differences and fact versus fiction, the better off you're going to be in making those decisions for your business.
It's a great point. Chris, if the listeners want to find you or find out more about you, where would you recommend they go?
Best place to go is my website. You can reach me at chrishood.com, CHRISHOOD.com. And on my website, you can find my social media profiles. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find my blog. You can find my book. You can go find that on Amazon and buy it. But everything is right there, chrishood.com.
Love it. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing these amazing insights about AI and life and the storytelling journey. It's been great, and I very much appreciate you joining.
Appreciate it as well.
And to the listeners, thank you all so much for joining. Hopefully you got some value out of this time. I know I have. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.